Which mage is the hardest to play in Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail? Is there a ranking here, or are they all equally simple and it doesn't matter? Well, I ran some polls to gather some data with results ranging from 8,000 to 9,000 votes, which definitely shows some interesting information. So, what does the community of Final Fantasy XIV, or at least the ones we can poll here, think is the hardest mage? For the longer version of the poll explanation, check the hardest tank video, link in the description. The way the polls are done is that we compare two jobs in pairs until every combination of jobs have been compared, and from this information, we can get a ranking of what's harder than what. The question being polled is as simple as, what is the hardest job in your opinion? And, welcome to the internet, we simply have to account for the fact that someone might vote based on casual content, hard content, leveling experience, max level experience, difficulty of optimization, or just for the lols. So, let's talk about some of the things that can make a job easy or hard, and get to the ranking of mages. Dead last. Summoner. Many the hardest part is not falling asleep, and it practically plays itself jokes were shared. There are of course difficulties involved in Summoner's rotation and toolkit, but it is pretty much agreed upon that whatever challenges these are less than what the other mages have, and might not be close. But let's talk about it. What makes Summoner easy? Relative to the other mages, by the time you hit level 58, you start spending less time casting than not casting due to Dreadworm Trance, giving Summoner incredibly flexible mobility. The rotation itself is also very straightforward, with the main choices being what order you use the three primals in. A major contributor to Summoner being perceived so strongly as being easy is the fact that its rework with Endwalker clearly made it a lot simpler to play, which further emphasizes this feeling that the job became easy. Summoner being one of two DPS jobs with a raise also gives it a ton of value in making things easier for its team at large. With that said, what makes Summoner hard? Many of the things that can make Summoner difficult are weirdly specific things that you might run into depending on how you approach the game. For starters, Summoner has one of the most overwhelming toolkits when it comes to being introduced to it initially. While jobs like Dragoon and Monk are still learning about basic combos, Summoner already has a burst cooldown sequence with a follow-up pair of attacks, and all of this is controlled by summoning your pet. Many of the tooltips you would need information from as you level are only available when you have access to the button itself in actual combat, meaning it might be really difficult to actually intuitively figure out how good something like Ruby Ruin 2 actually is. Many of the tooltips in the toolkit just don't explain really well how they work. Admittedly, Summoner lends itself a lot better to simply pressing some buttons and seeing what happens, which is a design that Viper and to some degree Pictomancer also seems to follow. Due to the weirdness of Summoner's toolkit, it also has the weirdest tricks to optimize with that stick around with varying intensity all the way up to level 85, where Elemental Mastery sort of makes things stick together better at 86. The key examples of this weird jank includes auto attacks being a significant amount of your damage at lower levels especially, and certain amounts of spell speed, particularly large amounts of spell speed, actually being capable of making Emerald Ruin a damage loss. When it comes to max level difficulties, or actually all level difficulties in this first thing, between the four mages, Summoner feels having the wrong amount, notably not enough, spell speed most front and center, with Summoner effectively losing a cast of Impulse as a result. Making the most of Slipstream by timing its cast to where the targets actually stay in the circle can be difficult to figure out, and while Ruby Rights represent the majority of Summoner's casting, it also represents a mandatory casting section of the job that you can't just skip over due to the damage it offers. Similarly, Ifrit also includes the melee section, which can easily trip you up during mechanics. And, while these kinds of issues could be painted over with a just use Ruin 3 and don't risk it, Summoner kind of needs to use these tools to make the most of the damage it actually can provide. Due to the strictness of the rather simple trance burst, Summoner may also be one of the jobs more easily impacted by even small increases in or inconsistency in latency. The combined result leads to a job that, once you put some time into it, seems pretty straightforward, but can be surprisingly difficult to pick up initially, as Summoner carries the same hallmark features of all the mages of having extremely free flexibility in what to do, leaving you plenty of opportunity to do it wrong. Third place, Pictomancer, the newest addition among the mages, and a job that is very flexible outside of its burst, when it comes to both when it wants to do things and what it can do in response to boss mechanics. A job almost made for the 2-minute burst. It has a way to keep up the pressure in almost any situation. So, what makes Pictomancer easy? A huge point for Pictomancer when it comes to ease of use is the exceptionally low button count, which appears even lower when we take into account how many buttons are effectively buttons covering the same single purpose. Pictomancer's attack rotation also for the most part only covers 3 cooldowns, 2 of which have charges, leading to a huge amount of flexibility. The fact that Holy and White isn't considered a damage gain to spend, while simultaneously being strong enough that it is perfectly fine to use, also means that you pretty much always have a few GZDs to move around with if you need it. Further extended by options like the hammer, swift casting a motif, and just smudging, which is also often considered one of, if not the best mobility option, combining a big dash with a short sprint to easily allow you to adjust to the destination. Compared to all the other mages, Pictomancer also does not have a spell with so long a cast time that you cannot weave something. Single weaving is always possible. Finally, due to the sheer amount of contextually locked buttons compared to the other mages, Pictomancer is a lot less willing to let you make a crucial mistake beyond simply not using a cooldown and things like that. That being said, what makes Pictomancer hard? Pictomancer's rotation features the longest casts among the 4 casters that would be used under normal circumstances. Although, capping out at a humongous 2.3 seconds probably makes it a lot less impressive, but it is technically a point of difficulty. While Pictomancer's garden is wider than Black Mage's ley lines, Starry Muse is the one damage cooldown Pictomancer has that is not flexible on timing or repositioning, meaning to do the most damage, you have to use it when it comes up, regardless of how incredibly inconvenient it is relative to the boss mechanics. Additionally, while Pictomancer does not need to stay in the garden for as long as a Black Mage, failing to do so is punished much more severely as the effect is much more concentrated, and comes with an additional attack rewarded for finishing it correctly. When it comes to optimal rotations, the fact Holy and White is an option becomes less useful, although perfectly timed out fights can mean you might know that you have a certain number of them to use. Doesn't change the fact that Pictomancer's mobility options get significantly handicapped when optimizing to this degree, which can make optimal Pictomancer appear significantly less mobile than all of the other casters in some specific scenarios. When it comes to picking up Pictomancer initially, the job of course starts at level 80 with nearly all of the toolkit already in place, which can be a bit overwhelming. Also, one last thing, there is also a level of optimization with Pictomancer, even to some degree in casual content, which involves planning out when you do your motifs so that you get the value out of downtime. But I feel like that's more like just a utility thing. I don't know if it makes the job harder. All that being said, I would personally not have been surprised if Summoner and Pictomancer had been more evenly matched in the polls. Second place, Red Mage. Back around the Shadowbringers days, Red Mage was by many considered the easy mage, which was quite ironic, it being the only one you couldn't start as. What makes Red Mage so weird in a contest of difficulty is that exactly what makes it challenging at first is very different from what makes it challenging at last, depending on the skill level you're focused on. So then, what makes Red Mage easy? Once you've learned the basics of the job, Red Mage's extremely regular access to mobility makes it almost feel mobile in the same way Summoner is. Almost all the time, as every fast spell cast leads to, when including slide casting, 3.5 seconds of movement. and for a large part of the casual content available, this is almost equal to having completely free movement. On top of that, Red Mage also has Corps and Déplacement, which, while maybe a bit more complex to use due to needing a target, offer burst movement that Summoner doesn't have as reliably, and Pictomancer doesn't have in the same quantity. And for longer movement sections, a melee combo into the magic burst is almost as good as an Astrologian's light speed. Pretty much as good when Manification makes the melee combo ranged. And all of this is before we account for swift cast and acceleration giving more instant casts on speed dial. When it comes to the defense department, Red Mage is the only one with regular access to a usable healing spell, I'm looking at you, Physic, and where Summoner offers swift cast res access, Red Mage has infinite swift casts with dual cast, making it the ultimate resing machine. Whether it be casual or savage or even ultimate, being able to res 4 players in under 20 seconds is pretty handy, and effectively makes content feel easier and less punishing for Red Mage. Which of course begs the question, what makes Red Mage hard? Red Mage starting at level 50 with essentially the skeleton of its toolkit mostly fleshed out can already be overwhelming, but then whether you understand how dual cast works or not is what will decide whether you can play Red Mage or not. It isn't an unusual problem that a crucial piece of information about how a job functions being primarily housed in the traits menu rather than the actions menu can lead a lot of players to entirely miss it. Indeed, just casting a couple spells should make it clear, but then you have to do the math to figure out that going fast and slow is actually worth it. And when you initially pick up the job, the power difference between Jolt 1 and Thunder and Arrow is such that Jolt is barely above half the power of the slower spells, so a less attentive player might not even realize the benefits of alternating. This one bit about dual casting can make the job feel extremely overwhelming to understand initially and is misunderstood frequently. Another point of difficulty is that Red Mage has to come into melee range every now and then for their melee combo, which for a more skilled player doesn't really stand out much. You'd be in melee range anyway, just for the safety reasons a lot of the time. But for a less experienced player, it might be confusing to have to juggle that with the ranged rotation on top for their melee combos. The two different mana types giving Red Mage two versions of the same spells for black and white, which might, again, make the initial learning curve really steep, understanding the differences are so minor. When it comes to harder content, while Red Mage has all of that mobility after every fast spell cast, a lot of mechanics require enough movement that, sure, yeah, you can move a lot after casting for 1.5 seconds. Good luck finding that time! Meaning that Red Mage has to find that mobility elsewhere more often than you'd expect. And when it comes to optimizing, in today's Final Fantasy XIV, Red Mage is the only mage that actually can produce an outright clean damage gain with no fuss or smoke and mirrors by using swift cast and acceleration, as skipping a fast spell and going straight to slow spell represents a damage gain, of course. So, a lot of the time, a Red Mage has to weigh whether they need that instant cast before sending it. And if we go one step further, you may have heard a lot of players suggest that Red Mage must be the hardest mage in the game for various reasons, the other mages becoming easier around it being one. But the core reason that is often overlooked outside of the most dedicated of Red Mages is about GZD displacement, Flesh and Contra Sixth. Essentially, both of these OGCDs optimally need to go out on cooldown, and assuming you just do your dual casts normally, Flesh comes out on every 5th dual cast, Contra Sixth on every 7th. But every time you use Swift Cast or a melee combo, it shuffles your GZD alignment a half step, meaning you are now 1 GZD off from that timing, and optimally need to fix it again somehow. While this doesn't sound like much, every GZD length Flesh is delayed loses you 48 potency. For Contra Sixth, on a single target, it's 30 potency. And this can quickly add up over the course of a fight. Goofing up the timing of Flesh by 1 GZD every time it is ready will lose you a whole cast of it within 4 minutes or so, simply due to how short its cooldown is. So while everything else is going on, whenever you melee combo or use swift cast or to some extent use acceleration, you have to account for these half and whole step relations to flesh and contra sixt, and to not forget it if you don't want to lose damage. Which is the cherry on top that leads many to believe Red Mage should be regarded as the hardest mage. However, these particular points of difficulty are not very front and center, so only a small percentage of players notice it, or at least care about it. Oh, lastly, Red Mage is also now the only mage with relevant randomness in its max level rotation. Now, this of course leads us to the hardest mage, Black Mage. The master of front and center confusion and difficulty, which it has somehow held on to through all the difficulty reducing and simplifying changes of Dawntrail. But how is that even possible, I hear some of you ask? Well, let's get into what makes Black Mage easy. Compared to all the other mages, no, actually between all other jobs, Black Mage's whole rotation doesn't really have timers to worry about. The closest you get is that you technically have 3 damage cooldowns and some instacast utility and thunder that can run out, but if you need to stop and focus on a mechanic, the exact place you were in your rotation stays. Speaking of cooldowns, 2 of the ones Black Mage has are simply resource refills, and the third, Ley Lines, has 2 charges and can be moved a bit, giving it a ton of flexibility. So you can use it when it is safe to do so, meaning that Black Mage has very little it truly needs to worry about tracking that isn't the exact thing it is actively doing at any one moment. Once understood, Black Mage's basic rotation is also very straightforward, and with no OGCD attacks and relatively little capacity to context switch out of nowhere, means that you have a pretty solid idea of what's going down at any time, while not having to worry about some cooldown coming in from the side changing your active rotation completely. Now, what makes Black Mage hard? Despite being a job you can pick up from the very start, Black Mage is possibly one of, if not the most confusing job to pick up. Yes, if you read everything, surely you can figure out what you need to do. Ice makes MP, fire spends it, so you spend it and then build and start again. However, how many casts you're supposed to have is something you calculate yourself based on costs and max MP. How is most effective to switch, you gotta figure out yourself, and it changes at various levels depending on how optimal you want to be. And even if you understand that fire spends and ice builds, you could easily spend with the wrong spell or build with the wrong spell, especially considering the fact that as you level up, several spells that stick around in the toolkit become obsolete in some way or another. Scathe especially. And speaking of obsolete spells, the difference between doing what probably seems intuitive for AoE and doing what is optimal, Transpose Flare, is so massively different in power that learning Black Mage includes simply not doing the intuitive version. And Transpose Flare also relies on a piece of knowledge that isn't mentioned anywhere in the Black Mage toolkit. The tiny little detail that Flare works on as little as 800 MP. A lot of little potency math calculations are needed to actually know on your own what is actually right or wrong to do, and what is right or wrong varies based on level, with different dank tricks at level 40, Thunder Freeze, 50, all the RNG shenanigans to optimize the single target rotation, 60, Transpose Flare, 70, using triple casts to double dip with shenanigans if you want to, 90, Paradox and AF1F3P, and 100, well, I guess that's just Flare Star. Whether it be single target or AoE, there's a little something that you're just supposed to know. So much so that I have videos dedicated just to discussing these types of shenanigans. To try and give a bit of an abstract example, for most jobs, knowing whether option A or B is better tends to involve comparing those two actions specifically, or maybe the connecting combos. For Black Mage, figuring out if a specific sequence of spells is better than another tends to additionally also include the recovery period, since a shorter, faster line comes with the caveat of the good part taking up less of the total attacks. while a longer line takes up more of the time, making the ice recovery period less impactful on the overall performance of the line. A very simple example of this is, do you or do you not finish your single target fire sequence with flare at level 60? And the answer is actually it depends. Even a question as simple as, if the boss becomes untargetable, should I always switch to ice and recover, is met with, it depends. Because depending on how far into the fire sequence you already are, resetting also includes a new warm fire 3, which is fine, but perhaps not worth going through if you still had most of an astral fire state to go through. But it also depends on kill time, or where this choice will leave you the next time the boss becomes untargetable. In the perfect scenario, you finish any sequence of combat off with 0 MP, with the next spell in the queue being most definitely Blizzard 3 or a reapplication of Thunder. Meaning that the question about Umbral Soul can turn into a conversation of, well, what are you doing 3 minutes from now if you do? Ultimately, it is worth mentioning that a lot of these optimizations are not nearly as crucial as you might think, but due to how they tend to attach to relatively simple front and center questions, it means that new black mages starting to learn the deeper stuff of the job will get smacked in the face with all of this stuff super early. And the things that are front and center, like understanding which spells to use in fire and ice, are themselves so obscured in numbers that it is difficult to figure out intuitively. But because of how simple it all seems once you get it, leads to a very funny situation where the players that get it are completely dumbfounded by anyone finding it difficult now, while anyone not in the know is shocked that anyone would find it simple to understand. But with all that said, which mage do you find hardest? For me personally, if I was ranking them from how I feel them when I play, I would probably rank them from easiest to hardest: Black Mage, Pictomancer, Summoner, Red Mage. Which might sound crazy, but once you understand Black Mage, it is insane how easily it can adapt to almost any combat scenario due to how indifferent its rotation is to the given situation. And Summoner would rank high simply because I don't play it that much. And when I don't play Black Mage, I tend to lean towards Pictomancer for its similarly approachable toolkit. That said, the only thing that surprised me about the polls is that Black Mage didn't rank second after Red Mage, considering how close Red Mage and Black Mage seem to be in the perceived difficulty in the past, and how much Black Mage has changed since. However, I also feel that all the simplifications Black Mage has received has further highlighted the things that actually make the job feel difficult to pick up for a lot of players. Speaking of which, I am also curious what mage you prefer to play alongside how you would rank their difficulty, because due to the convolutedness of mages, it isn't entirely uncommon for someone to find their mage of choice a lot easier to play, simply as a result of playing it a lot more. Do let me know in the comments. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Twitch or Ko-Fi, links in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, at the launch of Dawntrail, Pictomancers could choose to remove the buff that dictates their 1-2-3 combo, Aether Hues, meaning they could reset their combo at will. Due to the fact that Water in Blue generates palette gauge while Thunder in Magenta does not, it led to a rotation where you deliberately avoided using Thunder in Magenta to get extra subtractive palette uses. I heard some call it the paint thinner rotation. To avoid this, Aether Hues can no longer be manually removed, but the trick still exists and adds to the difficulty of perfecting Pictomancer to this day by just finding 30 seconds to do something else in.